Welcome everybody to Class 1 of the Craft of Grading 2 for Effects PhD. I'm your professor, Mike Matusik. Before we jump into the coloring, I'd like to give you a little background on how I got into the business and how I ended up where I'm at now. I started off out of college living in LA, and I worked at a facility called Laser Pacific. And right out of college, I was answering the phones at night and hanging out during the day with the colorists, and their senior colorist kind of took me under his wing and showed me the tricks of the trade, and gave me a good foundation of color correction techniques. And I think at the time it was a Da Vinci 888 Renaissance, one of the two. But at the time, the high-end color correction system, and was there for a few years, and then I got married, came back to Chicago, got into a facility that had film transfer. And I assisted for a short time, and the color seat opened up, and I got lucky, and like a lot of colorists in the business do, they don't necessarily plan on being a colorist coming out of college, but they ended up there, and kind of the passion for the craft kind of drives them, and it's pretty exciting field to be in, and so that was 10 plus years ago. At the time, I was on a Da Vinci 2K with a C-Reality telecine. Then we started getting into digital intermediates, and we invested in a Nucoda Film Master and did our first digital intermediate on that, which is pretty cool to compare the Da Vinci 2K, actually the 888 to the 2K to the Nucoda Film Master. And then about 5-6 years ago, a couple guys and myself started a company called NOLA Digital Film, which is the facility we're at here, and we invested in a Baselight, a film light Baselight system. This is a Baselight 2, which is, it relies more on the GPU acceleration, and we also have the blackboard here. Our main client base here is ad agencies, and we do some indie filmmaking, work with independent filmmakers, and work on some digital intermediates. Not a lot of that work in Chicago, but there's definitely a need for it. We have an ARRI scanner, and 2K projection, and True Light for our color management software. It's interesting to as far as colorists these days, because 10 plus years ago, not a lot of people wanted to be a colorist come out of college. They wanted to be editors, they wanted to be filmmakers, they wanted to be, Steven Spielberg or whatever. But, so when I discovered color correction, I was like, well, that's really cool, and I didn't know much about it. And then it drove me to where I'm at today, but these days are very, very cool, especially for you guys at home, because you can have a color correction system on your laptop, on your PC at home or whatnot, and you can learn the fundamentals of color. You can learn techniques that you can apply to a real paying gig, which didn't exist not too long ago. So, it's a pretty cool time. There's going to be more people that are going to have the skill set, and it's it's definitely an exciting time. I mean, you can color correct on your iPhone. This happens to be a $250,000 Baselight system, but it doesn't matter. You could have a free piece of software at home, but lift, gamma, gain, they have a lot of the same tools. So this is the blackboard panel for the Baselight. It's pretty standard color panel. It's got lift, gamma, gain, track balls, and rings. The rings adjust luminance, and the track balls adjust the differential and the color in each channel there. There's a lot of these buttons can be preset. A lot of these knobs can be preset. Each color channel and each lift, gamma, gain region has a reset. There's unlimited undo buttons and version buttons. There's a numeric pad here where I can save versions in a scratch pad. This is all my layering tools to be able to navigate my different layers quickly. Shuttle controls on both ends, left-handed, right-handed people. And just a way to work more efficiently. The stylus is built into the panel, which is pretty cool. The full keyboard right here that you can work really quickly. So a panel is a way for colors to work very efficiently. So, but it's not a necessity to color correct with. I would love if everybody, watching these classes would have one at home, but I know majority of you don't, and that's okay. If you have clients behind you, it's more of a necessity than if you don't. You can still do the exact same things, come up with the exact same looks if you don't have a panel and you're just using a mouse or a stylus. But it's very cool to have. If I didn't have this, I would be lost with the Baselight, because I just I don't use the GUI to color correct. I use the panel, and it's just a way to work very efficiently. It's it's pretty interesting. So other than that, I say let's just get started and start coloring. Cool. So I got some underwater footage here. Will be the first set of footage that we're going to work through here. I got 4 different shots that I got loaded in here, and I think the first thing when I see this footage, the first thing I would probably think of is, what's the client going to want out of this footage, and how am I going to approach that? Each of these shots is a little bit different. This shot's pretty murky and green, and it's even more murky and kind of faded, and then we cut to this shot, and there's some white sand. We're getting a little brighter, a little cleaner. There's a little bit of water up there that's a little dingy looking. And then this shot has that pretty little bizarre fish with some more washed out water up in this area, but some nice foliage. So I would say when I approach a color correction, I try to find the hero shot, kind of like what shot can I make the most pretty, and then I can bring those other shots to it. So I would probably flag this one as being the shot I'd want to work on first, because honestly, it's the one that excites me the most. So, generally that's going to, excite everybody else. So I'll flag this one as kind of the one I want to start with, and then match these other shots too. So first, before I even start grading, I just want to kind of walk you through my Baselight GUI, just so you kind of understand exactly what you're seeing, so you can apply that to whatever application you're using. I typically don't have my scopes on the GUI. I typically have it set up something more like this. So, but just so you can see, it's nice to be able to see the scopes. And I think in the next class, I'll get a little bit more into reading the scopes and how you can use a technical tool like a waveform and vector scope to be creative. A lot of people don't use the scope. Some people use histograms, but there's some interesting things that can help you in your grading. So here are the scopes. Up at the top here, I have they call it the cut view in Baselight. This is where you can navigate. If I have a grade on one shot, I can copy and paste from there very quickly. And down here, when I don't have any color effects down in this timeline, these are my 4 shots. This is called the input strip, and then from there I will build grade stacks. So here's my input strip, and over here are all the parameters for that input strip. Got format, file location, just a lot of basic stuff. And so what I typically like to do, this is just straight linear footage. It originally came from a red, but I have a ProRes version of it, so all the raw settings aren't available to me, so which is cool. These are very, again, you can look at the scope. Nothing's clipped, nothing's crushed. It's a nice signal. And from here, I'm just going to start grading. So I'll drop in layer 1 here, and typically my layer 1 will be a base layer where I'll kind of set general balance and contrast. This particular shot, you know, the foliage down here has kind of some yellows and some greens, and the water has some blue in it. The fish, I have no idea what that's supposed to look like. That's where a client might come in handy, but it's a colorful fish. So things look pretty well balanced, but I'll throw in a base layer here and I'll name my layers. Because when you start getting over, you know, 2-3 layers, you know, it starts to, you know, you want to be able to know which layer is which. So my base layer is here, so maybe I'll just dial in a little bit of mid-tone, bring the mid-tone or gamma, you can call it. You know, bringing that down, give it a little more contrast. You know, right away that takes some of that haze off it. Underwater footage is actually fairly tricky footage because it's you know, it's kind of a little washy, a little hazy. So you know, it's not as clear cut, you know, where you want to go with the contrast with it, because the whites a lot of times aren't pure white, the blacks aren't black, so it's a little tricky footage, but it's also really fun footage. So I start off with my base. You know, it's pretty well balanced, so I'm not going to do too much with the base. The next layer is where I'll do my heavy lifting, do my look layer. So here, I'll bring the blacks down. As you can see, you know, I'm using my lift control, which is in the Baselight. I have the lift, gamma gain. Right now I'm affecting just the whites in the lift, so you can see this controller here. You can see the Baselight controls are actually very sensitive. You know, it's like you just go a little bit south of center and all of a sudden it's very crushed, you know. So the rings on the blackboard panel are a little bit more aren't quite as sensitive. So I'll bring the blacks down, and I'm working in RGB, so when I bring the blacks down, it increases saturation, which is actually a good thing with this footage. I'm getting some nice color separation there. So, you know, I'm just doing some nice primary stuff here. So, got the lift, bring that down, and the whites. You know, like I said, the whites are a little bit more of a mystery when it's underwater, because you know there's going to be a lot of blues in there. So, you know, so that's starting to look kind of nice there. And I'm just going for a nice rich kind of look. You know, I think, you know, this is like kind of a tropical kind of vibe. So, you know, this is pretty washed out looking. So I think, you know, the client's going to want to see something that's rich, that's colorful, that's more tropical. You know, they don't want it to look like the bottom of a river. They want it to look like the bottom of a tropical ocean. So to do that, you want to pop some color, and you want to. So right now, again, I'm bringing mids down, bringing the blacks down, and so right now I'm looking at the image and I'm like, okay, it's colorful fish, the greens are popping nice, and now my eye kind of goes up to this washed out area, and it's kind of murky, but it'd be nice to have some more rich colors, some richer blues. So I'm just going to build on my stack here, and I'm going to throw in another layer, and here I'm going to put a shape in there. So you know, it's kind of traditionally been called a power window. Generically in Baselight, it's called a shape. In other applications, I think shape is a little bit more universal. So I'll just draw a quick shape, and this is definitely getting into secondary color correction. You know, I'm isolating with a shape. And kind of matting out an area. So right now with this shape, I can affect inside or outside of this area. So I'm definitely getting into secondary color correction. And you know, you definitely don't want to, like, when you get to an image, try to do a lot of the work in primaries, because you'd be surprised with some of the coolest looks that you see in Hollywood flicks or in TV commercials. A lot of the looks are with primaries. So don't think primaries are just kind of like just for the basics. You know, you get a lot of looks in primaries. You know, you can throw the blacks, you can, you know, instead of making black, maybe put some blue in the blacks, or change the color of the whites. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do. So, but here I have a nicely balanced image, so I'm going to go to a shape and start adjusting a portion of the image. And here I'm just dropping some mids in the top part of the image. And I'm just going to feather my shape there. And you can start to see it's all about, it's kind of like a lighting film. It's all about directing the eye. Right now my eye is going right up to the top of the frame, but I want my eye to go to the fish. So by adding some density, it really helps direct the eye. Which brings up a point by saying density, I could have said bring the exposure down, bring the mids down. I'm saying bring the density down because it's a little bit more generic, I think as a colorist, you kind of have to be, you have to visually translate, adjectives that, the way people describe things. You have to be able to, if somebody says, can you, somebody may say that's brightness. Somebody may say that's, it's not saturated enough. You got to know, well, am I going to use saturation to bring this down up at the top, or am I going to use midtones to drop the mids down? So when somebody tells you a term, you have to kind of say, do they really mean that, or do they not mean that? So you can't take what somebody says literal. So I'll just kind of play through this shot here. So that's actually looking, it's moving a little bit. I could probably track that window on there, but I have enough of a feather on that shape that it's actually feeling not too bad. So this is a pretty basic look. I'm just giving it some richness. Again, doing some pretty basic color correction here. So now I can just kind of play on it a little bit. Maybe I'll bring the whites up a little bit back in my master layer, in my look layer. Give it a little bit more pop. But coming from here, pretty washed out, not much color, not much blues. To here, it's starting to feel like a sexy image. So cool. So here's, got a basic look. It looks, it's very tropical. It's very, let's say this is the Discovery Channel look here. So maybe the client's looking for some different looks. Usually when I see an image and a client comes in the room, I'll probably say, I'll give them my point of view. I say this is where I would take the image, and that's where the client would either say I like it, or I'd rather you go in this direction. But it's good to put your point of view out there and say this is what would look cool. But ultimately, the client's paying you to do the job. So if they want to see something else, it's helpful to show them versions. So let's save this in my scratch pad as version 1. This is the Discovery Channel look, let's say here. And so the next look, let's just do something a little bit, a little more pushed. Let's say this is going to go into a feature film that's more of like a, it's setting up the scene of the crime. We'll go a little bit crunchier with it, make it more of a cinematic look. So we'll start over. Again, I'll start from a fresh, no correction on there. Again, I'll throw in my base here. And actually, what I usually do is I'll set up a stack that just has empty corrections in it that interesting. That looks something like this, and has my base, my look. I have a curve and a shape, just empty shape in there, and an output layer. And what an output layer is after I have something set up, maybe I just want to put a tweak at the back end, and I'll usually do that in the output layer. And sometimes I'll have a sharpening layer on there. So it's just a quick way to work. And so I'll do my next look with this preset stack here. So again, I have my base, I'll just drop a little mid-tone, give it a little density, and then I'll do some of my more heavy lifting in the look layer. So let's crush the blacks down, give it kind of a little bit more of a gritty look that, again, when I'm dropping lift, I'm dropping RGB, and I'm getting more saturated colors, and starts to look kind of nice there. Play around with doing a little desat. And when you're versioning stuff for clients, you don't want to necessarily spend 20 minutes on one version. You want to do stuff quick just to kind of generalize it so you can at least give a client an idea. So I crushed it down, I desaturated it. I'll throw a little window up top like I did before. Maybe I'll desaturate it a little bit more. It's starting to look a little bit more like it's like, is the big fish from the other side of the frame going to come out and eat this little tropical fish? It's looking a little bit more menacing here. So just by a little crush in the blacks, a little bit desaturation, you got your Disney Channel look that's really saturated. It looks more happy, and then you're a little bit more of a feature look. Just by crushing the blacks, desaturating. It's a quick way to say which direction you want to go, and I think that's just very easy for a client to see. You want to show big differences. Sometimes when you say A or B and it's like the client says, I can't tell the difference, that frustrates clients, and you really want to, maybe this is too crushed, maybe this is too flat, but that's okay, because you're just trying to dial in the look that, once you kind of connect with the client and they're excited, you're excited about the same direction, that's a good thing. So they say they like this version, but maybe it's too crushed, but at least you have a direction. Alrighty, so we have our two kind of directions that we're trying to kind of sell the client on, and let's say we're going for a little bit more of an edgy look. So this Disney version / Discovery Channel version's out. So they like this crushed version. They like what's kind of going on up here. It's got some nice tone, but this down here is getting too crushed, and the fish is getting kind of lost. So how do we tackle that? There's two different things going on there. So let's say the first thing we want to do is kind of open up some of these shadows, because right now it's feeling very heavy down here. So it's unbalanced tonally. So the blacks are crushed after my look layer here. So let's maybe throw another layer before the look layer, and let's grab a shape and just kind of quickly draw a shape on the bottom portion of this and feather it out. So we're basically grabbing this portion of the image, and we'll just take the blacks back up a little bit. You can start to kind of feel that frame balancing out. So that's starting to feel a little bit less heavy. The blacks aren't so crushed. And again, when you're working with underwater footage, it's black is kind of knowing where to crunch it, because it's kind of a haze over everything. So you can kind of have some fun with the contrast. So something like that feels kind of nice. So now we kind of opened up that section, and now we want to kind of bring some color back to the fish, because we've desaturated the rest of the image. Again, coming from here down to here. So we'll name this one. I usually shorthand it by calling this the south vignette. So that's kind of the south part of the frame. And we'll throw in another layer, and we'll name this fish. And so to bring out the orange in the fish, I'll use a secondary. So in Baselight, there's a couple ways to do a secondary isolation. They have a a hue shift layer, they call it, which has, just fixed secondaries. So they have RGB, cyan, magenta, yellow, with saturation, hue shift, and luminance control. But those are, if you look at a color wheel, those are wide pie shapes. So, trying to find these oranges would grab other parts of the image. So we'll want to use a secondary control that's a lot finer. So I can use a hue angle, which is very similar to a DaVinci kilovector. If you're familiar with the DaVinci tools, and then DaVinci or Baselight has a nice tool called a D key, and it builds a 3D key, so I could actually, within the same secondary, I can grab oranges and greens if I wanted to. But in this case, I'm just going to grab the fish color. So it's just, I'll swipe it on there, and it gets a nice isolation to start, actually. And I can plus and minus, so it's grabbing some of this green over here. So I'll take that out. And you can view it a few different ways. I like to give it this pink that's just like this color that you rarely find in an image, just so I can see it easily. Some colors like to use gray, which has kind of been the traditional DaVinci matte layer. But I use pink, Sometimes I switch it up when I get bored to like a hyper green or something. You can also view it this way, or you can see the key. And so I'm going to stay there, and I will just kind of just add some saturation to it. And, again, you can go as far as you want or not, because it's, I have no idea what this fish is supposed to look like. It's got a lot more orange, because I'm crunching it down. Some of these oranges in here are getting kind of lost, but he's definitely coming back to life now. Grab some more of those tones in there. And now that I have it isolated, I can even open up the blacks if I want to, and I can, because what's nice is now I have lift, gamma, gain inside that secondary, which is nice. So right now I'm lifting the blacks, adding a little orange to the blacks, and now he's kind of really becoming a character in this frame, which is pretty cool. So he's surrounded by, kind of a desaturated kind of environment, and then his color pops out, which is kind of nice. So, if you come back to the beginning of the frame, he's over this black backdrop, so he's really popping out. So we can save that. So now we can jump back to our original. We showed our client the discovery look, the crunchy look, and then they liked this direction, but this needed a lot more finessing. So from there, we used a shape to open up the blacks at the bottom of the frame, and we used another secondary to add some color to the fish. So it's kind of interesting. So now, let's maybe refine it a little bit further. Maybe we'll add another layer. I'll throw a shape up there. And maybe let's bring a little bit of a density to the top of the frame, just to give it a little bit something extra there. And you can see I had a earlier vignette on there that I actually forgot about, but it's not bad to double up corrections like that, because it's just a way to version things out. And here's layer 1 of that vignette. Here's another. So that's not a bad thing. And there's so many different ways to work. You give something to a colorist. Colorist A, B, and C are going to approach this image, totally different ways. So and you can use the tools in many different ways. Like I could, you can get to this look with using curves. You can just use keys, like with Lightroom, they have the shadows, highlights kind of function, so, there's, different ways to work, and I'm using lift gamma gain to get to this correction with some secondaries and some shapes. And as you can see, this window moves out of the way. So we'll just add a keyframe, move it up. And just let that animate there. And then enter a giant shark and eat the fish. Now, that would be cool. But so you can see, from where we started to where we're at, we're pushing it quite a bit. There's some interesting greens and stuff in there with the seaweed. You can have some fun with this image because there's some nice primaries in there. Play with keying the greens, with the blues. So from here, we would probably want to jump to some other shots and kind of you don't want to take the first shot you work on too far because you want to make sure you can bring the other images up to it. So that's something to think about is, maybe dial in the first shot quick, get somewhat happy with it, but don't be married to that until you make sure those other shots in the timeline can get there. So before I get too much further into this image, I think in the next class we'll probably try to take the next 3 shots and get into this ballpark and see if we can match those up. So this one will probably get finessed from where it's at based on the other images because we want it to feel like a sequence that feels like it's in the same world. And if you take one shot too far, the other image can't get to you. You're going to have to kind of meet them in the middle a little bit. So I think that's enough for the first class just to kind of get our feet wet with this footage. And I hope you enjoyed the first class, and hope to see you in the forums and send me any questions that you may have. And we'll see you in class 2. Thank you.